Hi everyone. We're going to be talking about Beethoven's musical style and contributions today. So Beethoven was not Mozart. His musical prowess was not entirely natural. If Mozart was a painter whose brush easily danced across the page, Beethoven was a sculptor who gradually chipped away at the marble until he could finally fashion it into something. And I don't think that's difficult to see. Beethoven's melodies honestly kind of stink. When he tries to do something lyrical, it's more often than not pretty terrible. Now, there's occasions where he does hit the mark, for example, the F major violin romance, but, that's not at all the norm. But his inability to write melody doesn't stop this guy, not at all. He instead really leans into this idea of creating thematic material out of these small motific cells. For example, and we're going to talk about this more in the next video, think about his Fifth Symphony. The main theme isn't really a theme at all, is it? It's just 3 short notes and 1 long note. Yet he develops that 4-note motive into this really incredible and memorable theme that almost everyone knows, even if they know nothing else about classical music. So growing something out of small units, that's a big thing with Beethoven. And that speaks to our next point, which is that Beethoven really expanded the classical era genres of sonata, concerto, symphony, string quartet. These things that have sonata form as their base. And I do mean that quite literally. Take Eroica Symphony, the Third Symphony. That piece doubled the length of really any of Mozart or Haydn's symphonies. Like, that's insane. The guy adds a choir to his Ninth Symphony. He adds piccolo, trombone, contrabassoon to his orchestra. He has these sudden dynamic contrasts, almost jarring accents. Everything just gets bigger. Softs get softer, sure, but the louds get louder. Things are extreme with this guy, and that seems to have been in both his music and his life, as you know after the last video. Now, there are a few specific innovations to the symphony that I want to talk about here in some degree of detail. So let's just start off with a quick definition of what a symphony is. I'm sure you all know what it is already, but let's nail down the RCM definition. Symphony is a multi-movement orchestral work originating in the 18th century, usually organized in 4 movements: fast, slow, moderate, fast. At least one movement is in sonata form, and that is typically the first movement. You already know this stuff, I'm sure, so let's just keep moving. So what other symphonic innovations did Beethoven make? Well, usually the third movement of a piece, a sonata, string quartet, symphony, that kind of piece, it is, as you know, a minuet and trio. Graceful, elegant, dance-like. Beethoven, as you'll discover, began to substitute the minuet and trio with a scherzo and trio. So what's that? Beethoven substituted the scherzo in place of the minuet as the third movement in the sonata cycle. Scherzo is Italian for jest or joke, and like the minuet, is in triple meter, but is generally more dramatic than the elegant minuet. The scherzo could be humorous or ironic, and, as with the minuet and trio, it contains a contrasting middle section, the trio, resulting in ABA form. So scherzo, trio, scherzo. So basically, we swap out the minuet for the more dramatic scherzo. Easy? Easy. We'll find an example of this in the Fifth Symphony. Also in the Fifth Symphony, you'll find the use of cyclical structure, which means more definitions. Cyclical structure is where material heard in one movement recurs in later movements. This creates structural unity in a multi-movement work. Again, this is something you'll see in the Fifth Symphony, where you have that 3 short note, 1 long note motive coming back at various points throughout the symphony. Just while we're at it, I should give you the definition of a motive. I know we already referred to it, but let's give you a good definition of motive. This is an example where the RCM puts down motive in their vocabulary section, and they say to go look at the glossary, but then you go to the glossary and there's no definition, so thanks for nothing, I guess. So because there's no RCM definition, let's go to the New Oxford American Dictionary, and when you do, they send you from motive to motif, and this is what you get. So, a short succession of notes producing a single impression, a brief melodic or rhythmic formula out of which longer passages are developed. Straightforward enough? Now, the last thing I'll mention about symphonic innovations is that Beethoven starts adding programmatic elements to his work. And you can see this in his Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, where there's explicit extra musical material embedded into the score. And then last thing for this slide, Beethoven really tried to max out what new keyboard technology could do, especially using its fancy big new range. Let's talk about some of the stuff he wrote. Symphonies. We got 9 of them, including number 3, Eroica, 6, Pastoral, 9, Choral. Concertos, we got 5 for piano, including number 5. Okay, including number 5, which is called the Emperor Concerto. I'm sure you've all at least heard of it, even if you haven't actually heard it. We got 1 violin concerto. We got a triple concerto for piano, violin, and cello. Orchestral music beyond symphonies, we got overtures, including Egmont and Leonore. Now, Egmont Overture is actually the overture to a larger piece of incidental music, whereas Leonore, which the RCM calls Leonora, is actually kind of a weird situation. From what I gather, Beethoven was trying to write an overture for his opera Fidelio, but he kept reworking it. So we have the proper Fidelio overture, but then like 3 Leonore overtures, which are sort of failed attempts at making an overture connected to the opera. Now we sort of kind of sort of treat them as their own thing. Chamber, we got 18 string quartets, 10 sonatas for violin and piano. We got piano trios, including Ghost and Archduke. That's just some of the chamber music. Tons of chamber music with this guy. Piano, we got 32 piano sonatas, including Pathétique, Moonlight, Waldstein Appassionata, Tempest, and Hammerklavier. And bear in mind that these 32 piano sonatas, we're not talking about short pieces. Like, Hammerklavier is long. We also got many sets of variations and smaller scale works. For example, we got like Furelise. Vocal music. Fidelio is an opera that he wrote, the only opera. Mount of Olives is an oratorio. Missa Solemnis. Ooh, there's a space between solemn and is. Solemnis, it's a mass. And then a song cycle called To the Distant Beloved. So no discussion about Beethoven is complete if we don't talk about his 3 periods. As you can see, we break them quite obviously into the early, middle, and late periods. Now, I won't restate the dates since you can just read them right off the screen. Early period was when Beethoven was firmly situated in the classical period, and the style is really that which was inherited from Haydn and Mozart, the other 2 in the big 3 of the classical era. The stuff he's doing is pretty typical of the period. His sonata form is pretty standard. We've got a lot of Sturm und Drang stuff. You know, he really seems to prefer minor keys, leans into C minor a lot. The RCM says that his use of tremolo and abrupt contrasts is a sign of Sturm und Drang. Maybe, I guess, but you know, I also guess that could, yeah, it could be a sign. But that's not necessarily the hallmark of Sturm und Drang. I just want to mention it because it's in the book. If you want to listen to some early period stuff, take a look at the first string quartets, the first 2 symphonies, first 10 piano sonatas. Basically the first of any of this stuff. But as you'll notice in all of these, it's still undeniably Beethoven. Sure, there's a Haydn Mozart influence, but it's just that. It's just an influence. He's not a copy of anyone. He's uniquely his own guy. The middle period. We're getting... starting to see what the RCM calls more romantic elements, but of course, we only know them as romantic elements in retrospect, right? Nevertheless, we do see of what we recognize now as more romantic elements. You know, things like lots more chromaticism, normatively strange modulations. We also get Beethoven really leaning into this heroic character in his music. Think of the Fifth Symphony, which we'll be talking about more, where we gradually move from this tragic C minor in the first movement to this glorious C major in the last movement. I think I said that right. We move from C minor to C major. Now, if you want to have an audio education on the middle period, have a listen to Fidelio. The violin concerto, there's only one. It's incredible. It's basically a whole ton of arpeggios, which is remarkable that the piece is as miraculous as it is, given that it's arpeggios and scales. Symphonies 3 to 8, and the Emperor Concerto. Now, in his late period, Beethoven gets a bit weird. Now, a little tidbit about Beethoven is that tests have been done off of his hair since he's died, and it's been determined that he had pretty bad lead poisoning. This might explain some of his less than savory personality traits, and some of the weird stuff he started doing on the piano. Anyways, late period. Beethoven is getting kind of abstract with his music. There's this introspective quality to it. Like, it almost stops entirely sounding like Beethoven in a lot of ways. You might, when you listen to the early and middle stuff, it's clearly Beethoven. You know it immediately. But there occasionally, it might take you a second to figure it out with some of the late period stuff. It's hard to explain without listening to it, but so I'd really encourage you to listen to his late piano sonatas in particular. We see him really leaning into counterpoint more, adding more fugues. And then the biggie is that he adds vocalists, both choir and four soloists, to his Ninth Symphony. He's still, in his late period, pushing what symphonies are, what they can be, what they can do. He's really pushing this musical envelope here, and it really propels music not just into the Romantic era, but into the 20th century era as well. Like I mentioned, take a listen to his late piano sonatas, opuses 109 to 111, Missa Solemnis, and of course the Ninth Symphony. And that is all for today, folks. Thanks for listening. If this video you found in any way helpful, please consider subscribing and giving us a thumbs up, as it really helps us keep moving this channel along. Thank you.